Right at the tail end of February, Remnant 2 got a new patch. It contains a good amount of bug fixes, some balance changes, and even 5 new corrupted weapon variants. I'll be covering the corrupted weapons in their own video down the line. For now, I want to focus on the balance changes. Hunter's Focus now activates half a second sooner. Previously, it was really annoying to just be dodging attacks and having the buff not proc at all. Sometimes you just have to dodge a bunch, and you don't have even a second to get your bearings, or to aim down sights. It might seem like a small change, but that smidgen of time can make all the difference. Die Hard now gives a stack of Bulwark when it's on cooldown. A pretty small change, but it can help. With Marble and Clay Ring, you could actually be at 5 stacks constantly should you go down. War Stomp now deals explosive damage, and this is an awesome buff. Now it can benefit from sources like Detonation Trigger or the newly buffed Summoner. Medic? Got nothing. Sorry, Medic bros. Handler now always gets their damage buff even when their dog goes down. I'll admit, I didn't use Handler enough to notice this, but it's a good change nonetheless. Melee damage and crit chance has been added to their damage perk as well. For me, this is a great change. I held off making the melee video knowing that some balance changes were coming. Looks like I'll be using Handler in some of those builds now. Lastly, the Howl from your dog's skills are now affected by aura size increases. So just resonance, for now, I guess. Gunslinger's Quick Draw has received an additional charge and deals 50% more damage. A very welcome buff, as the skill was definitely lacking compared to the other two. Summoner's damage trait has been reworked. The bonus is now constant. Gone are the days of having to worry about your meatballs exploding or something. On top of that, it now also gives blast damage and crit chance. We now have an explosive specialist among the archetypes. Mods or skills that deal explosive damage will essentially double dip from this perk. War Stomp Summoner is a thing now, and I kinda love it. This is a huge change, and from what the patch notes suggest, these might not be the only adjustments the archetype is getting. Alchemist received some quality of life with its flask throwing. The action now benefits from casting speed sources like Flashcaster. Also, in the case you throw a flask and it doesn't land somewhere within a few seconds, the skill will be refunded. I kinda had a hard time trying to test this in the ward, but it seems like around 4 or 5 seconds. This'll probably help with cases where your flask clips through the ground or just despawns from network shenanigans. Engineer got an interesting change. Its damage perk now grants 25% range damage and 10% crit chance. It's basically like Gunslinger with a ton of skill damage now. The idea of this change was to make deploying the turrets a more worthwhile choice, considering they can also crit now. But I think a damage boost to the turrets themselves would have been a fine fix, but I guess this works too? The 2 builds I made with Engineer in my rifle and handgun video aren't gimmick builds anymore. They're real. I don't know how to feel. Archon got some fairly big buffs. Chaos Gate now gives 50% more damage, up from 15%. The downside is that the damage reduction penalty sticks to you for 10 seconds after leaving the ring. The status in the menu still shows the damage bonus, but it's just the penalty. This does make Chaos Gate look more appealing, but to me it was already the go-to skill for builds anyway. A 15% DR penalty is pretty small too, for a 50% damage increase. Like, Bark Skin alone makes that just 5%. Power Creep now purposefully generates mod power through active mods. This, as well as a few other changes I'll get to later on, will bring back some of the power those infinite mod gen builds had from back in the day. Invader's damage perk has been tweaked in a positive way. The stack duration has been reduced from 15 to 10 seconds, but the perk now only loses 1 stack at a time, like the Drifter set from Remnant 1. Perfect Dodging now also grants max stacks. I am all for this change. One of my biggest gripes with Invader was the perk duration. Now that it's just like the Drifter set from Remnant 1, I can see myself using this archetype way more. Gold Digger is now way faster. It's gone from a 2 scoop to a 1 scoop. The patch notes say it's basically half the time of the original, and I believe it. If you stack Flashcaster with some of the other sources, you dig ridiculously fast. A nice change, although I still wish the 2 middle perks could be given some combat-oriented effects. Erupt on Ritualist got the same treatment as War Stomp, and now deals explosive damage. Death Wish no longer kills the user, and instead leaves them at 1 HP. Kinship once again reduces the health drained by the skill, albeit no longer taking armor into account. Only taking 60% of your health and damage makes Death Wish far more worthwhile, as you don't need to stack additional sources of lifesteal to combat it. Overall, some good changes across the board. Some slightly questionable ones, but nothing outright negative. Moving on to the gear changes, we got some slight nerfs to nearly every source of spread reduction. Although I do agree that it was a bit silly how easy it was to hit max spread reduction, I'm not sure if nerfing multiple sources was the best course of action. The patch notes mention a potential spread reduction cap, and I'm not sure I like that either. They could place a cap specifically on shotguns, but if the player wants to stack reduction sources, they're already making sacrifices on either rings, traits, concoctions, or fragments. Either way, these changes aren't really that bad. 85% spread reduction is still pretty good. Maybe throw on Targeting Jewel to make it a full 100% and get some extra range. Tranquility Font also seems to have had its other stats affected as well, not just the spread reduction as the update says, which is a bit of a shame. On the bright side, Focusing Jewel had its recoil reduction doubled. The spread reduction could have probably stayed though, considering it takes 3.5 seconds to ramp up. Post-edit Rye here, I just realized, after looking at the footage, that the spread reduction did go down, but the time to charge it up also went down, which does make sense, you know. It's basically like 10% per second now. Although the point still stands, it didn't really need to change. Originally, I did kind of want it to be buffed, maybe to charge faster, but now it's even less spread reduction. And considering it's 3 seconds, that's kind of a long time. By comparison, in this same patch, the aim down sight's time for Hunter's Focus is now 0.5 seconds from 1 second. Yeah, that's a skill. It's gonna be a lot more for what you're putting into it instead of just a passive ring. But I don't know. Something about it just doesn't seem right. The Feedback Mutator and Reprocessed Heart now both build mod power through active mods. When run with Archon, both of these generate an absurd amount of mod power. Working with active mods pushes them even further. Reprocessed Heart especially. Archon will easily boost it to fully charge any active mod before it ends. This is even faster with trinkets like Burden of the Follower or the aforementioned Feedback Mutator. Now we have a clear understanding of what is and isn't supposed to work through active mods. It may have taken a while to get here, but it is worth it. The last set of balance changes are to some of the weapons. Anguish now deals the correct amount of damage. This was something I noticed when the Awakened King first released. I didn't want to judge it too harshly since I knew it was bugged. Now that it's fixed, I really like it. Although it fires slower than the double barrel, it almost matches it in damage. I know the idea of the weapon is to time your shots to get the big explosion, but I really enjoyed just Unga Bunga Caveman spamming the primary fire. It does take some getting used to. Since it's trying to be a charging weapon, it's likely to eat your button inputs if done too quickly. I like this weapon now. Good fix. Crescent Moon no longer grants double arrows on overcharged shots. I am fine with this change. It raises the skill ceiling of the weapon a little bit. Technically a nerf, but one that won't affect players that were already good at timing their shots. Twisted Arbalist now reapplies its debuff to enemies while the mod is fully charged. It also now reloads the weapon on mod activation, which is a huge quality of life change. 2 tweaks that really help the weapon feel better. Although I'd say there's still room for improvement. Nanoswarm on Nebula now applies a quote-unquote small corrosive dot on hit. The patch notes describe it as small, but for some reason, in-game, it's way higher than the base dot from the primary fire. Oops. Conceptually though, I like this change. That extra stack of corrosion will actually pair pretty well with Fetid Wounds. 1 dot from the primary fire, 1 from the mod, and 1 from the mutator. Easy 15% crit chance. Huntress's Spear now applies Corroded on thrown hits. On top of that, its projectile and charge speed were increased. Now we have a ranged melee for applying Corroded. Nice. And finally we have Spectral Blade, which has had its area of effect no longer scale with resonance. Pretty sad to see this interaction just flat out removed, although it was kinda silly having a 12-meter radius, especially when combined with something like the Shocker Mutator. I kinda wish they just reduced the base AoE size to maybe like 7 or 6.5 meters, and then allowed Amplitude to buff it, since it is, you know, an area of effect and not an aura. It's whatever, the weapon is still really good without it. And yeah, that's the patch. Not too much, although they do seem to be planning more with the second DLC's release. I think the patch is pretty good, all things considered, even if there are a few busted things currently. And that's all I got. Expect the Melee Apocalypse tested video to come out soon. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.